room spun as his breath grazed my neck, hot and deliberate, his fingers tracing the edge of my silk nightgown with a boldness that stole my breath. I, Vivian Caldwell, at 61, stood frozen in the dim glow of the fireplace, my silver blonde hair cascading over my shoulders, my heart a thunderclap against my ribs. Liam, my stepson, barely 29, loomed close, his lean frame taut with tension, his dark eyes burning into mine with a hunger that mirrored my own. The crackling flames cast shadows across the oak-paneled walls of our Vermont estate, illuminating the forbidden dance we'd begun. His hand sliding to my waist, my body arching toward him, despite the scream of conscience. My husband, Robert, was asleep upstairs, his snores a distant hum, oblivious to the betrayal unfolding in his own home. The air thickened with the scent of cedar and sin as Liam's lips hovered inches from mine, and for a heartbeat, I surrendered to the madness until a floorboard creaked, shattering the spell. I gasped, pulling back, my nightgown slipping further, exposing the curve of my shoulder as the weight of what we'd nearly done crashed over me like a tidal wave. This was no fleeting fantasy. It was a precipice, and I teetered on its edge, my soul ablaze with desire and dread. I stumbled toward the armchair, my legs trembling, the velvet cushion cool against my fevered skin as I sank into it. Liam remained by the hearth, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his hands clenched at his sides, as if fighting the same battle I was. The firelight danced across his chiseled features, high cheekbones, a jaw shadowed with stubble, making him look both boyish and dangerously mature. "Vivian," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't mean to, but his words trailed off, the air between us charged with an unspoken truth. I pressed a hand to my chest, willing my pulse to slow, the memory of his touch lingering like a brand. The house was silent now, save for the faint tick of the grandfather clock, but the tension coiled tighter, a living thing that threatened to consume us both. This wasn't how my life was supposed to end. At 61, I was a woman of grace and restraint, the wife of Robert Caldwell, a retired senator whose name carried weight in New England's elite circles. Our estate, perched on a hill overlooking the Green Mountains, was a monument to our shared history. Its stone walls, stained glass windows, and sprawling library, a testament to decades of stability. Robert had given me security, a life of comfort, and a reputation polished to perfection. But he'd also given me isolation, a cold, creeping loneliness that had settled into my bones over the past 15 years. His health had declined, his mind drifting into a fog of memory loss, leaving me to manage the household alone. My skin, still luminous despite the lines around my eyes, and my figure, softened but elegant, had once drawn admiration. But now they went unseen by the man who shared my bed. I filled my days with gardening, hosting teas for the ladies' auxiliary, and reading by the fire, but the emptiness gnawed at me, a silent ache I'd learned to endure. Liam changed that. He'd returned home 6 months ago. After graduating with a degree in architecture, his presence a disruption to the quiet routine I'd carved out. At first, he was just a memory Robert's son from his first marriage, a gangly teenager who'd left for college years ago. But now, standing in the kitchen or sketching by the window, he was a man tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet intensity that set my nerves alight. The way his dark hair fell over his forehead, the way his fingers moved with precision over his blueprints, the way his gaze lingered on me during our conversations. It stirred something I'd buried deep. I told myself it was maternal concern, a flicker of pride. But the truth was a storm, raging beneath my composure. It began subtly. One crisp autumn morning, I found him in the garden, raking leaves, his breath visible in the chill air. I brought him a mug of cider, the steam curling upward, and he turned, flashing a smile that made my stomach tighten. "Thanks, Vivian," he said, his voice deep and warm, taking the mug with a nod. "Call me by my name," I replied, surprised by the softness in my tone. From that day, our interactions grew. He'd bring me sketches of the estate's redesign, his hands smudged with charcoal, placing them on the table with a shy grin. "Thought you might like to see this," he'd say, and I'd linger, tracing the lines, imagining his touch. The tension built like a pressure cooker, slow and relentless. One evening, as snow began to fall outside, I found him in the library, poring over a book by the fire. His sweater clung to his frame, revealing the definition of his shoulders, and the sight sent a shiver through me. I should have retreated, but instead I called out, "Liam, need company." He looked up, his eyes catching mine, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just us. He patted the sofa beside him, and I sat, the leather cool against my thighs, his knee brushing mine with intent. The touch was a spark, and I felt my breath catch, my body awakening with a heat I'd suppressed for years. Over the next weeks, the boundaries blurred. He'd find excuses to be near, carrying wood to the hearth, adjusting the curtains in the parlor, always with that knowing look. I began anticipating his presence, the way his voice deepened when he said my name, the way his gaze seemed to strip away the years and see me as more than Robert's wife. One snowy afternoon, I was curled up by the window, a blanket over my lap, when he appeared with a tray of tea and scones. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting it down, his eyes never leaving mine. The steam rose from the cup, mingling with the crisp scent of snow, and I felt a pang of something, longing, perhaps, or regret for what might have been. The psychology of it tormented me. I'd read essays on forbidden attraction, on the allure of youth, on the complex dynamics of stepfamily desire. Was I seeking escape, a rebellion against Robert's fading presence, or was it something deeper, a recognition of Liam's vitality, a mirror to the passion I'd lost? I told myself it was harmless, a fleeting temptation, but my body disagreed. Every time he was near, my pulse quickened. My skin prickled with awareness. I caught myself watching him, memorizing the line of his neck, the strength in his hands as he worked, the way his laughter warmed the room. The turning point came a month ago. Robert had retreated to his room early, his mind clouded by medication, and I wandered downstairs, restless. Liam was there, stoking the fire, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his forearms corded with muscle. The sight stole my breath, and when he noticed me, he straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Vivian," he said, his voice low, "you look radiant tonight." The compliment, so bold yet so tender, unraveled me. I stepped closer, the rug soft beneath my slippers, and murmured, "Thank you, Liam. You're too kind." His eyes darkened, and the space between us shrank, until I could feel the heat radiating from him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed in the vast bed I shared with Robert, the sheets cool against my skin, my mind replaying every moment with Liam. The house was quiet, save for the distant howl of wind, and I rose, padding barefoot to the parlor for a glass of brandy. As I poured, I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, and turned to find Liam in the doorway, his hair tousled, his chest bare beneath an open robe. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice a whisper in the firelight. I nodded, my throat dry, and he stepped closer, the air thickening with tension. "Vivian," he said, his hand reaching for mine, "I've been wanting to tell you something." My heart pounded as his fingers closed around mine, warm and firm, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in, my lips brushing his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question, but when he responded, it deepened into something wild, something I couldn't control. We pulled apart, breathless, and he rested his forehead against mine. "This is wrong," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know," he replied, his breath hot against my skin, "but I can't stop feeling this." The confession hung between us, heavy with possibility, and I knew then that I was lost. Over the next days, we stole moments, his hand grazing mine as he passed me a book, a lingering look across the dining room, a brush of his lips against my ear when he brought me tea. Each touch fueled the fire, each glance a promise of more. Tonight, though, had pushed us to the brink. I'd been unable to sleep, the house's silence oppressive, and descended to the parlor in my nightgown, seeking the fire's comfort. Liam was there, adding logs, and our eyes met. The air shifted, charged with months of unspoken desire, and before I could think, he was crossing the room, his hands on my face, his lips hovering. The near kiss was a storm, wild and unrestrained, and I leaned into it, my hands clutching his robe, until that creak, that gasp, forced us apart. I sank into the armchair, my mind a whirl, as Liam stepped back, his expression a mix of longing and guilt. The confrontation loomed. Robert's footsteps descended, slow and deliberate, and he appeared in the doorway, his robe askew, his eyes wide with shock. "Vivian," he rasped, his voice weak but accusing, "what is this?" I froze, Liam's hand slipping from mine, and the world shattered. Robert's gaze, usually so vacant, burned with betrayal, and I felt the weight of my actions crash down. "Robert," I began, my voice steady despite the chaos. "This isn't what you think." But the lie tasted hollow, and his laugh, frail and bitter, cut through me. "Don't lie," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I've seen the way he watches you, the way you've changed." The hours that followed were a tempest. Robert accused me of months of deceit, his voice rising with each revelation. How he'd noticed my distracted air, my late-night wanderings, the way the house pulsed with life when he slept. I countered with my own truths, the years of his withdrawal, the void he'd left me to fill. In a moment of raw honesty, I admitted it. "Yes, Robert, I felt something for Liam, but you drove me to this, your absence, your illness." His face paled, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd loved broken by my words. The fallout was inevitable. Robert demanded separation, his pride wounded, and I retreated to the guest room, the villa, a prison of my own making. Liam sought me out, his eyes filled with concern, and knelt beside me. "Vivian, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his hand on mine. I looked at him, this young man who'd reawakened me, and felt a surge of resolve. "No," I said, my voice firm. "This is my choice." The legal proceedings began, a quiet scandal that rippled through Vermont's elite. Robert took his name, his legacy, leaving me the estate and a modest sum. A hollow victory tinged with liberation. Liam stayed, not as a stepson, but as my partner. The whispers followed: cheating wife, taboo lover. But his presence silenced them. We redesigned the estate together, his hands on the blueprints, mine on the gardens, and the snow-capped mountains stood witness to our rebirth. The psychology of our love, age-defying norms, desire-defying duty, taught me that passion knows no bounds. At 61, I'd found a second dawn, and as Liam kissed me by the fire, the world felt whole again.